Hello, I'm Anoosh Chakelian, Britain editor of the New Statesman and host of this podcast. And joining me in the studio, I have our political correspondent, Freddie Hayward, and Rachel Cunliffe, our associate political editor. And this is actually my last week on the podcast for a while because I'm going off on maternity leave. So,
yay, congratulations, Anoosh.
Thank you. I'll miss being in the studio each week, but, maybe I'll be listening to the podcast in some horrible, early hours.
No, please take a break.
Scenario.
Don't actually listen to it.
You can introduce the baby to the New Statesman podcast.
yeah.
Forget the classical
Formative
music.
listening experience.
All right. So this is the You Ask Us episode, and we have been looking through our virtual mailbag for your questions. But before that, Rachel and I kind of wanted to hijack the format a bit and ask Freddie some questions. So we ask Freddie, because you were in Brussels this week to report from the NatCon conference, the National Conservative Conference, and it sort of turned into quite a drama, didn't it? So can you just tell us a bit about why you decided to go and then what actually unfolded when you got there?
Yeah, I decided to go just because these National Conservative conferences bring together National Conservatives from around Europe and America, and they're often quite interesting. We saw the one in London last year, which essentially became a Tory knife fight. You had Jacob Rees-Mogg and Suella Braverman and Miriam Cates and Michael Gove all there essentially pitching themselves for the leadership of the party. This one was extremely different. This one was much more focused on Europe. The European parliamentary elections in June was they see as a huge opportunity for the nationalist right to take some power and inject some change into Brussels. These only happen every 5 years, so it's a big opportunity for them. It became a much bigger diplomatic, international affair, in part because the local mayor in Brussels, he decided to shut down the conference. And he said...
Was there any warning that he was going to do that?
No, so there was some rumours earlier on in the day on Tuesday, and then we saw his tweet. And this was just the local, it's not the Brussels mayor, it's the local mayor of the area within Brussels. And he just said the far right is not welcome. I've issued a public order for the police to come down and shut down the event. So these rumours were sort of swirling around, and I don't think people believed them at first. But the organisers already had some issues. This was the third venue that they'd booked because protesters had pressured venue hosts around Brussels to pull their support for them. So this was the third one. We didn't know the night before whether it was still going to go ahead. Anyway, so by mid-morning, Nigel Farage is stomping around on stage, regaling tales of all the Brussels cafes and bars that have not welcomed him over the past 20 years when he was an MEP. And three policemen turned up and issued this order to essentially say that you got 50 minutes to leave the premises. I should say, who are at these conferences. So Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, Eric Zemmour, the French presidential candidate. He was this very flamboyant, hard right critic of Islam who is sort of riding a different wave alongside Marine Le Pen. He's actually got Marion Maréchal, Marine Le Pen's niece, in his party, and she'll be standing in the European elections as well. You had Suella Braverman turned up to not much excitement, I must say. Nigel Farage was there. And then there was lots of theologians. There was a cardinal for some reason. There was some priests, lots of think tankers. So it was a nationalist rodeo, you could say. Yeah. So the police turn up. They essentially say, you have to close it down because we essentially disagree with your views on it because of what the mayor said. Nigel Farage is on stage saying, you'll have to pull me out of here. He was absolutely delighted, gleeful, well tanned with a jazzy tie on. He came out into the foyer, declared it was Soviet Russia, and said he never seen such a great reason for Brexit. They ended up leaving, and then the organisers challenged it in the courts, and there was a compromise essentially with the police lined outside and saying that no one could enter, but you could leave. So it was a gradual shutting down of the event as people left.
So people couldn't get in, and those who were in, if they left, couldn't get back in.
Yeah, quite. So we were sort of stuck there. You had to choose.
So you were sort of held hostage in a way.
Yeah, and then the food couldn't get in for a while, and the drinks couldn't get in. It was
like a sit-in, basically.
Assignment, I have to say.
It was quite exciting, really. The police and protesters right on my street. So, no food. But it continued. That's the key point.
So is that why Suella Braverman was speaking to an empty room, or was she speaking to an empty room because no one wanted to listen to her?
No, because Nigel Farage went into the foyer. the foyer, and everyone followed him.
So he was stealing her thunder.
Completely. And then Braverman was on stage, and I didn't hear what she had to say, and I don't think many people did.
That tells you something actually as well about Suella Braverman and the effect and influence she has versus what she thinks she has compared to someone like Nigel Farage. But what was the vibe like after this happened?
People are gleeful. They were the organisers taking photos of one another in front of the police. If anything can prove their point that freedom of speech is under threat at the heart of Europe, it was this. The European Commission's competition authority was 50 metres up the road. The symbolism was undeniable. And I think they felt as if they could go on to declare themselves martyrs and declare that the freedom of speech is under threat, which it clearly was.
What was the rationale for shutting this down?
So that was the tweet from the mayor. He also issued this order, which went through the views of some of the attendees. He said they were homophobic. He also used the words Eurosceptic, as if that was reason to stop people speaking. But the overarching reason was public disorder.
Okay.
So because of their views, he was saying there's a risk there's going to be a large protest. There was not a large protest. There was a very small protest that came later in the day. I would say it was maybe 100 people, about 30 metres away from the venue. There was no risk of disorder. There was no disorder inside the venue. So I think it was a facade, really. And I think his tweet showed that it was a purely politically motivated. And that's why there was such outrage. The Belgian Prime Minister later that day tweeted that it was against the law. Rishi Sunak ended up condemning the move, and the organisers took it to court, and they eventually won. It went to the highest court in Belgium the same day, which I can't really imagine happening here. But
fast tracked.
So late that night,
at least they're efficient.
Yeah, quite late that night they struck down the order, and it was able to go on the next day.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's. I mean, we're sort of laughing a bit, but it's serious, isn't it? Because one of the main arguments of many of the speakers at these kind of conferences is that, you know, what they want to say is kind of considered beyond the pale by kind of a liberal society or certain institutions that have a lot of influence in people's lives in Europe or in the UK. But there is a sort of truth to it, and and it's not just on the right. So we've got an interesting diary by Yanis Varoufakis, the left-wing economist, the former Greek finance minister, in this week's issue, where he writes actually about quite a similar thing happening. He was at a conference in Germany called a Palestine Congress. He was only speaking over video link. The police invaded the auditorium, grabbed the microphones, tore out the wires of the live streaming equipment. And he said he's been banned not only from going into Germany, but also connecting via video link to events in Germany. And he actually has written defending the National Conservative Conference in Brussels in a piece in Unheard recently, calling this kind of thing a symptom of Europe's slide towards a quagmire of farcical authoritarianism. So it looks like, you know, this kind of new division is not right versus left, but sort of state overreach versus those who want the freedom to say potentially offensive things. And we should say Varoufakis has said controversial things about the Israel-Gaza conflict.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's sort of the liberal establishment is going after those both on the hard left, you could say, with Varoufakis, and also the hard right, those at the National Conservative Conference. We've also got it in this country. We've got to remember that the hate speech laws in Scotland have now come into force. They've seen over 7,000 complaints or to the police within the first 2 weeks or so since it's come in. So there's a theme developing, and I think it's been heightened by the conflict in Gaza, in part because so many people are concerned about rising anti-Muslim bigotry and also anti-Semitism, and they're trying to clamp down on that. And in doing so, as we've seen from the Conservative government as well, they're clamping down on protests and also legitimate political views, whatever you think of them.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.